Wow, well, that was wonderful singing, and it is so good to be together this morning. And it is just an exciting, enjoyable, joy-filled time of year, especially because this is the time of year when families and friends are together, maybe people who haven't gotten to spend time together in a good while, and I see that's the case for many here this morning, getting to visit family, and it's really good to see you and to have you come and be a part of the family this morning. And I also recognize that maybe on the other hand, these can be hard times of the year. For kind of the same reason, right? You see people who are filled with so much joy to be together with the people that they love, and you can't help but think about the people who feel distant or perhaps who've gone on. And wherever you find yourself this morning, whether you are filled with joy for the times in which you do get to spend together with the people you love in this time of year, or whether it's a hard time and you are reminded of perhaps the loneliness that you feel, I hope that we can all remember that the greatest and the most important and most meaningful relationships that we have, the most important family that we have, is right here. And those aren't just words to say, those aren't just like kind expressions, though that's true, they are kind, but it's real. This truly is the most meaningful family that we have. And it is so good to be together this morning, and we have a lot to be grateful for. Earlier in the week, I came across a story. I'm not sure if it's a true story. It could just be one of those preacher stories. Either way, it's a good one, and I think a song was made about it. And it's about a boy who he walks into the kitchen and he hands his mom this receipt. It's just a receipt made of like scrap paper or something, and on this receipt he writes down, for making my bed, $2, for taking out the trash, $5, for raking the leaves, $10, right? He charges a lot. For playing with my little sister, $50, something like that. And so he hands this to his mom, and his mom, looks at it, and then she flips it over. And I've noticed moms are like really good at this kind of thing. She flips it over, and she begins to write on the back. And I just want to make sure that I get this right. So she writes on the back, for the 9 months I carried you growing inside of me, for all the toys and food and clothes, for wiping your nose, for all the nights I sat up with you and took care of you and prayed for you, for all the time and tears and the cost through all the years. 600,000, no, I'm just kidding, it doesn't say that. What she actually says at the end is, for all the costs of love, no charge. For all the costs of love, no charge. And I imagine that this boy, it probably took years of counseling and therapy for him to overcome the guilt of that moment. I feel guilty just from reading that. But it's stories like this or things like this that remind me, maybe remind us, of just how ungrateful we can be. How much we sometimes lack in gratitude. We tend to focus on what's missing, to feel like we don't have enough, to feel like we're maybe owed something more than what we already have. And so rather than counting all of our many blessings, we end up writing down our own kind of receipts for life. But this week, I was thinking about a question that has really stirred me, and it's a really interesting question. It's a question that Paul asks the Corinthians, and it's a question that I really believe has the power to change your life. You say, no, that's like a preacher thing. You exaggerate it to make it sound really important. I really do mean this. I really do believe that this question has the power to change your life. Or I hope that at least it's begun to change my own. And the question that Paul asks there in actually 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 7 is this. What do you have that you did not receive? What do you have that you did not receive? This is a powerful question. And have you ever thought much about that? I think sometimes we think about, we'll say things like, we're so undeserving, or we deserve nothing. And that's true, like we're not entitled to anything, but it's also kind of like, it kind of puts things in a negative way. And I like how this is like a positive way. Like, what do you have that you did not receive? Everything is a gift. Right? What do you have that you did not receive? Absolutely nothing. All of life is a gift. The kids that you have were at least half a gift from your spouse and probably took the whole village to raise them. The person that you found to marry was probably just as much a gift by some known or unknown matchmaker. The joy or the job that you worked hard to get was probably through some connection or recommendation of a friend. The school or program that you got into is probably owed almost entirely to the parents and the teachers and classmates who helped get you there. And those are all just like different gifts that maybe we associate with different phases of life, but I really think you could ask this question of anything in life. What do you have that you did not receive? The sun that's shining down on us, the air that we breathe, the breath in our lungs, the very fact that we can wake up in the morning, the rain that comes and nourishes the earth and brings crops and fills our stomachs with food. All of life is a gift. And so what do you have that you did not receive? And it's not just gifts from other people, but it is, of course, ultimately a gift from God. And in reflection on this, G.K. Chesterton, who was just this really remarkable figure, everyone who, he's a prolific writer and actually was an atheist for some time before becoming a Christian and became a great writer, but he was known by all of the people in his life as the most joyful, exuberant, wonderful, and I mean that in a literal sense, the most filled with wonder kind of person that they had ever met. And he has just this amazing way of putting things. And G.K. Chesterton, this man who is filled with so much life and joy, he says this. He says, you say grace before meals, all right. Right? You say grace, you say thanks before your dinner, that's great, that's wonderful. But I say grace before the concert, and grace before the play, and grace before I can open a book, and grace before sketching, painting, swimming, fencing, boxing, walking, playing, dancing, and grace before I dip the pen in the ink. And you get the idea that this is a man, what fueled the joy, what fueled the wonder in his life it was that he was filled with gratitude. Everywhere he looked, he saw the world through the eyes, through the lens of grace. And so much so that he actually says this, I love the way he puts it. He says that gratitude is happiness doubled by wonder, right? What's the thing that makes you happy? What's the thing that fills you with joy? Gratitude is when you wonder and marvel about it to the extent that you can't help but recognize where it came from. Everything in life is a gift. And so, as I was thinking about this, reflecting on some of these things, I don't think that I have always lived life this way. I don't think that I've lived my life this filled up with gratitude. And so this morning, I just want us to explore what it looks like to start seeing all of life as a gift. What does it look like when I start to see all of life as a gift? And to see that, I want us to turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And the Apostle Paul, he writes this epistle to the Corinthians, and Paul was a man who was radically changed by grace. He was the Hebrew of Hebrews. He was the studied scholar, the persecutor of the church. But when he came face to face with the glory that transforms, when he was met by grace himself on the road to Damascus, everything changed for him. And it sent him on this remarkable journey in which he traveled all over the ancient world and wrote letters to churches like the one in Corinth. But his whole life after this moment of grace became fueled by gratitude. And in this passage, I think we catch a glimpse into the way that his mind worked. We see a man who was radically changed by grace and thus fueled by gratitude. And it's right here that we catch a glimpse of the way that his mind worked and saw the world. And he says this. He says, God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. So this is Paul's worldview. And when Paul writes this letter, he has a very specific good work in mind. This was the collection for the saints in Jerusalem. That Judean Galilean region was undergoing a severe famine and resulting economic crisis in which many of the Christians in Jerusalem were suffering, or if not suffering yet, it was soon on the way. They were going to feel the impact of this famine and economic downturn. And so he goes on this campaign where he starts going around to these churches, writing these letters, asking for them to participate in this great project of generosity. And what's interesting about this, historians note that this was the first donation of its kind in the world. This is the first time that any group of people pooled their resources together in such a way as to give to a race or ethnicity or culture of people or nation of people that was not their own. And this was no small gesture. This wasn't, hey, you have some change in your pocket. Well, this was a massive undertaking. And it was, as historians remarked, the first of its kind in the world. It was a radical project of generosity. And as he encourages the Christians to participate in this effort, Paul realizes something very important about the way that we tend to see the world. And that is through the lens of scarcity. This is when I feel like I don't have enough. I am worried, I am concerned about not having enough, or that something is always missing. And one of the great problems is that when I perceive the world through this lens of scarcity, when I feel like I don't have enough or that I'm always missing something, I will never have anything to share. I will never have anything to contribute. In fact, no matter how much I have, I'll actually always end up wanting more and more and more. And in fact, I'll even end up taking in order to ease my sense of not having enough. That was problem number one in the garden, right? A world with everything they could want, but the one thing that's missing, they grab out and they take it because they feel like they don't have enough. It's a world of scarcity, but Paul says that's not the way that I see the world. I don't see the world through a lens of scarcity, but through the lens of abundance. And to help us grasp this idea, this world of abundance where God is able to make all grace abound to you, that you may abound in every good work, to help us see that, he quotes this psalm about what makes for a blessed life. And it comes from Psalm 112, but he quotes, he says, as it is written, he has distributed freely. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. And to us, that might just seem like he's just throwing in, like, was that like the Corinthian memory verse for the week? He just throws it in there. But to them, this would have been so counterintuitive to the Greco-Roman world. Because for them, gratitude looked different than it did for Christ and his followers. When Jesus came to this world, he introduced a whole new set of virtues: humility, forgiveness, compassion. These were all things that were not viewed at all as virtues in the ancient world. But Jesus and his followers come along and they revolutionized the world with these new set of values. But one virtue that was already present in the Greco-Roman world was gratitude. Except for them, it looked something like this. This is Peter Leithart. He's a historian and theologian. And in his book called An Intellectual History of Gratitude, he says this: ancient societies think of gratitude in circular terms, right? A donor gives a gift or does a favor for a donee or a beneficiary, and the donee is expected to return a gift or favor at some point in time to the donor. All right, so this is the way that it worked. And if you missed my artwork at all, it is back. I'm not sure how well you can see it. It shows up okay. I hope the arrows actually can. But this is, right, really simple drawing, very straightforward. But this is what gratitude looked like to the ancient world, right? The giver, or the fancy word would be benefactor or patron, right, would give a gift. Right, maybe it was money, but maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a service. Maybe it was someone who was very wealthy might put on and like host the community Olympics or something like that. And to all the people that he gave this gift to all the receivers or the beneficiaries or the clients in this patron-client relationship were expected, emphasis on the expected, to give something back in return. Right, and they probably couldn't also, donate the same amount of money, but it would be honor and praise and esteem. Right, they gained status in the culture. It was a way for patrons and benefactors to move up the hierarchy in the ancient world. But it wasn't just on a sort of scale where it was the benefactor and beneficiary, but even on the smallest rungs of Roman society, Peter Leithart goes on to describe how the whole Roman culture was built on this giving and reciprocity, where I give so that I can be given to. I give so that I can receive something in return. And in fact, I will certainly not give to anybody who I know can't give anything in return. And so this was the way that they saw the world. And notice here the problem of scarcity, right? Within this circle, within this loop is held all the resources of the world, right? There's nothing outside of this. It's giver and receiver, and everything comes within that. And so I better do everything I can to make sure that this cycle benefits me in a positive way. And what it does is it turns all the people around me into either resources or rivals, right? You're either a resource in order to get the things that I want, or you're a rival standing in the way of me climbing to the top and finding what in their minds would be the blessed life. And Paul says that's not what the blessed life looks like at all. Instead, it's not the one who sees through the lens of scarcity or the person who gives in order to be given to, but as he says, it's one who distributes freely. One who distributes freely, openly, generously, wanting nothing in return. And not only do they give freely, but they give freely, he says, to the poor. And think about that. Not only do they give expecting nothing in return, but they give to the kind of people who they know can't give anything in return. And then Paul gives this super cool analogy about how this works. He says in verse 10, "He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness." So to Paul, good works are kind of like seeds that you plant in the ground that bring forth something into the world, a harvest of righteousness. And just like a farmer during a drought or famine, when you see the world through the lens of scarcity, when you feel like you don't have enough or that you are missing something, you are going to be very careful and cautious about when and where and how you plant those seeds. And almost certainly you're going to be very stingy about giving any of those seeds away. But Paul says, what if the world doesn't work that way? What if the world doesn't operate through this lens of scarcity? But what if there is an abundance? What if, like the disciples who distribute the bread in the feeding of the 5,000s from just these 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they just have more and more and more? What if that's the way that things work? What if God will supply your every need in such a way so that you can go out and distribute freely? And you can give openly to those who can't give anything in return. What if that's the way that the world actually works? In fact, Paul, he doesn't say what if, he says God will. Right? God will supply and multiply your seed for sowing, and in that he will increase the harvest of your righteousness. And then Paul says this, and this is so powerful. It's like he boils it all down to just this one single thought in such a compelling way. He says in verse 11, you will be enriched in every way, to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgivings to God. And he says this service that in some ways is big and revolutionary and the first of its kind in the world, but yet in another way is so seemingly small and insignificant on a person-by-person individual basis. He says this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but it is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. And so rather than seeing the world as a place of scarcity where I'm worried about not having enough or giving only to gain something in return so that I can ease this sense of missing out, instead my worldview looks something like this. And this is the last drawing for today. It looks something like this. And I just wanted us to be able to visualize the words that Paul speaks here. It looks like this. It is a circle of reciprocity, but it's not a closed circle. It's an infinite circle. An infinite circle that begins with God. It begins when I see all the innumerable ways that I have been blessed by God. Enriched, Paul says, in every way. And isn't that true? I heard a sermon one time when I was growing up. It was called Blessings from A to Z. And when he started, I honestly thought it was going to be like the worst sermon ever. We were just going to go through the alphabet naming things. But it ended up being one of the most beautiful and memorable sermons that I've heard, because he just went through the alphabet all the way, A to Z, naming every single thing that he was thankful for. And I thought about writing down my own, but I know that would take far too much time. But I could tell that when he said these words, he actually meant it. And we sing the song, Count Your Many Blessings, Name Them One by One. Do we do that? I think sometimes we are so forgetful. We forget the blessings that God has given us. We take things for granted. And yes, sometimes things really are hard, and there really is tragedy and suffering and loss and hardship. Paul will be the first to tell you all about that. But imagine this. Imagine if the only things that you have in life tomorrow were the things that you were grateful for today. Imagine that the only things, like you wake up tomorrow morning, the only things that you have are the things that you're thankful for today. There's so much to be grateful for. Paul says, you have been enriched in every way. But it doesn't stop there. He says, when I see that, when I see all the innumerable ways that I've been blessed by God, my eyes become open to see all the innumerable ways that I can be a blessing to the people around me. And that's not just money. It's not just about a collection. It's not just about a donation. It's raking leaves on a Saturday morning till dark. I know a lot of groups were out late yesterday. It's tipping a little extra to the server who's having a hard day. It's offering counsel or advice or just a listening ear. It's writing a note of encouragement or sending a card to show your love and care. It's helping teach a Bible class even though your schedule is jammed packed and you wonder how you could possibly get it done. It's all the ways that you might help the poor and the hurting and the broken and the marginalized. It's giving of yourself freely to those who you know can give nothing in return. And it's any and every way that you allow the blessings that God has given you to overflow into the world around you. And when that happens, Paul says it doesn't end there. It's God who enriches me in every way to be generous in every way so that others can give thanks to God. It all wraps back around to him. When my eyes are open to see all the ways that I can be a blessing to other people, it comes back around to the giver of every good and perfect gift. So we are enriched in every way to be generous in every way. That results in praise and thanksgiving to our God. And I love the way that that same historian and theologian, what he has to say about this. He says, when this happened, when Jesus and his followers introduced this into the world, he says, actually, let me move forward. He says this, he says, Christianity expanded the circle of reciprocity. Right, so it's a circle, but it's this infinite circle. He says Christians expanded the circle of reciprocity and extended the field of gratitude until it covered everything. Until it covered everything in every circumstance. They burst the smaller circles of Roman gift and gratitude that was just about what I can give in order to gain, and thus sowed seeds of a new form of life in Greco-Roman soil. It says this radically changed the world. And so maybe we don't always see it in that way. Maybe we struggle to see these small acts of service as doing something as radical as that. But I love how Paul ends this section. And this is my favorite part. He says this. He says, they will glorify God because of your submission. Right, so because you take us up on this request and you participate in this radical act of generosity, they will glorify God because of this. And they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from, he says, your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others, while they long and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God upon you. So to Paul, these acts of generosity, small and insignificant as they may sometimes seem, are perhaps the most powerful ways that you and I could confess the story of Jesus. They are the most powerful demonstrations of the grace of God upon you and in you and through you. Because this is exactly what Jesus himself did for us. Jesus didn't see a world of scarcity, but a world of abundance. A world in which he received all sufficiency from the Father so that he could give of himself freely to us. So that he could give all of himself to us. Knowing that we could give nothing in return. Knowing that we could give nothing but praise and thanksgiving back to God. And so for all the costs of love, Jesus would say, no charge. And so what does it look like for us to see all of life as a gift? Well, maybe we could say it like this. If I can move forward. The more you abide in God's grace, the more you will abound in every good work. The more you abide in God's grace, the more real and apparent and more observant you are of all the infinite ways that you have been blessed by God. The more that you marvel and wonder in such a way as a man like G.K. Chesterton or other people that you know are just alive with joy, the more that you realize the gifts that you have been given, the more you will abound in every good work. And maybe that will be the small, seemingly insignificant ways, but maybe that will be the kind of ways that transform the world. And that's what Paul believes. That our small acts of taking in God's grace and allowing that to overflow and abound in every good work is exactly the kind of thing that changes the world. And so to end with the words of Paul at the very last part of this section, Paul reflecting on this generous gift, this act of gratitude that he was calling on them to participate in, and then reflecting on how amazing of a gift it is that God has given to us. How Jesus came and he saw a world of abundance and he gave all of himself to us, knowing that we couldn't give anything in return. Paul can have nothing else to say but ending it with this: thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. And all that I can say to that is amen. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. This morning, if you are wondering about becoming a Christian, maybe something in this lesson has taken root in your own heart. Maybe you recognize the infinite grace that God has given to you and you desire to commit your life to him in baptism. We would love to help you with that. Or perhaps you're here wondering if God's grace is still for you. I imagine we probably all wonder that at times. Is God's grace so infinite that it can truly cover even the mistakes I make one after the other? And the answer that Paul would say is absolutely yes. However we can help you this morning, we hope that you'll come now or make that known together as we stand and sing.